Hey pals, welcome back to a new video. Today I wanted to talk about the most recent game jam that I entered. It's Ludum 49 or Ludum Dare as I will be calling it. So in a previous video I already covered my process towards approaching game jams and why I think they're really important, but I haven't yet made a video that is like a post-mortem / breakdown of a successful game jam. And that's what I will be making today, because the game that I created, Trauma, landed in the top 10, and yeah, I made 6th, which is awesome. So let's talk about Trauma. Let's talk about the game, how it came to be, and the struggles, trials, and tribulations, and ultimate success. I think it was good. So leading up to the jam, I wanted to approach this a little bit differently than the previous jam. So last time I wanted to make a game that would be a post-jam game, so something that I would work on after the jam. And I've since decided that's not really in the spirit of Ludum Dare and doesn't really lead to good results. If you expect to make something that's bigger than what you can make in 48 hours, it definitely won't be finished in 48 hours, right? So this time I was like, let's just approach this completely organically. Let's just do it exactly as it was intended. So I did a little bit of prep in the beginning. I jotted down a few ideas for some of the top 10 or 20 themes that could have been selected, but the one that was selected I didn't really prepare for. So the theme was unstable. I really like this theme. I thought this is exactly what I want, because I really like those kind of vague one-word themes. They can be interpreted in a lot of different ways, whether it's mechanical or thematic in terms of content, narrative, or some combination of those. So I was really happy with the theme. And I had, unfortunately, I'm the kind of person who gets so excited and anxious about new events that I can't help but think about them in the time leading up. So an idea had already come to my mind about a game that I might be interested in making that had to do with trauma and dealing with trauma from a mechanical perspective. So weaving the narrative and the mechanics together. And I thought unstable, as in psychologically unstable, would be a really good fit for the jam. So I prepared a kind of like a timeline underneath my stream so that the viewers could track everything that I was doing. And that timeline was broken up into chunks, and each chunk had a different color representing a different stage of development. And the first stage is, of course, design. So for the design phase, I thought we would still go through the process of doing our due diligence and, just walk through how I would approach if I didn't have an idea already. So that's basic word association. What are the things that we associate with the concept of instability? What does unstable mean? Can we flip it? Can we think of examples of games that already tackle this? That kind of thing. At the end of it, we did have quite a lot of content written down, and I definitely came back to that later and helped flesh out the concept that I was working on. I should say, I actually overslept. I went to bed at about 12, fell asleep okay, and then got about 2 hours sleep, and then woke up. And from like 2:30 till about 5:30 in the morning, I was awake. Did I dream about the jam? I did. Shall we get into it? So I missed the first hour of the jam. I had this idea basically for a platformer where you store impulses of velocity, trauma, and place them on a timeline. So like you can get punched into the air and then punched forward and then punched diagonally backwards. And then your character will go like dum, 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 right? So you can like relive the trauma. And you wouldn't be able to jump otherwise. So the only way to actually get around was to play this sequence and rearrange the sequence to make it over different kinds of platforms. So it was sort of like a puzzle platformer in that sense. And so this is what I had sort of going in. We're going to make a puzzle platformer about trauma. We're going to cover psychological instability. The narrative for the game was going to be essentially a 2-character setup where we have the protagonist who is seeing a psychologist, and the gameplay is the therapy session sort of inside the protagonist's mind, in their sort of like cave of mind. And so this would leave us with something that was kind of fantasy, but also was grounded in something real. So the first thing I did was open up the project and start working on mechanics. just laying down very standard platforming style controllers. So, you know, moving left and right with the arrow keys. I did implement jumping because I knew that the character would be airborne and falling. And so just knowing whether the character is grounded, what happens when they hit a wall, you know, can you jump up walls, that kind of stuff. I managed to just iron that out before doing anything else. So once the base mechanics were in, I then started playing around with the sprite shape controller, which is a system that Unity has that I've been playing around with quite a lot recently. This was kind of like the one novel part of the jam that I hadn't used before in Unity. So the sprite shape controller is essentially a polygonal collider that has a sprite skinned by the polygon shape. So rather than doing just a standard grid-based tile system, it's just, you just draw shapes. And then those are the platforms, and the game can skin those as you see fit. From there, the obvious next steps were starting to implement this trauma system. So how do you gain abilities? How do you play the abilities back? It became really obvious very quickly that having an actual timeline, given that I had gone for keyboard controls, and managing, you know, instances of abilities on that timeline was going to be like way too much work. I think the timeline is too fine controlling. Like I think if we have this situation where you can place them like pins, then you can get a jump wrong by having the, you know, forward dash come too late after the jump or whatever, right? Like it's like, oh, I tried to jump and then forward dash, but actually what happened was I jumped, landed, and then forward dashed. So I think this fine tuning is too fiddly for a controller and would probably, it's too easy to get wrong. So instead, I think the list of sortable cards is actually really good. And I think what's kind of cool about this idea is that we can give them identities. And also what's cool about this is that they can just be trauma that's a memory. Like the presentation doesn't have to be literal. I actually think that this is a really key part of making a successful game jam game, which is the ability to be flexible, to make something that's practical. I think the timeline thing with playback is a really cool idea, but given that I only had 48 hours and I wasn't confident that I could build it in a nuanced way in that time, then going to something more discrete, like a deck of cards, is way, way simpler. And the players don't know what the original idea was. All they want is a game that's good. So pivoting in that way, I think was a really good option. So the rest of the first day was spent ironing out those mechanics. I essentially got things moving pretty well. I also had a few ideas for little puzzle elements that came about as I was prototyping the actual abilities and building out the state machine and actually working in the abilities. It became clear, oh, you know, if you do this in this order, you know, these abilities work in one way but not the other. And so the puzzle pieces started to come together. I wanted to make a point of actually having each of the pieces of the game, each of the mechanics, including like a little dialogue system, card sorting was really important to me, and the UX in general. I wanted to have those things nailed before actually building the game content. This seems kind of unintuitive, but I had resolved that essentially if the game isn't simple to learn, then it doesn't matter how much content there is. I can't keep players' attention if I don't have that onboarding nailed, right? And if the mechanics aren't in, I can't test that. So I really prioritized the process of building the mechanics and making those mechanics seamless in how they get introduced, and how they control, how they feel, and then building a game on top of that framework. I think not every game will be best made this way, but this game, given that I had kind of a novel mechanic and a bit of a different interaction, although the controls were very simple, introducing the player was really, really important. And I wanted to make a point of doing that while threading the story through. So after the first day of building out all that stuff, I was a little discouraged that I wasn't able to meet my target of actually having like a finished playable game on day one. It's a shame we didn't get more level design done, but honestly, I just don't think that it's going to be worth it. So like, yeah, maybe we should just do some like very, very quick, like, what's the word? Stock take. But I did a little bit of writing down and planning, and just decided that I would tackle the story the first thing in the morning, and then start working on art from there. And I dedicated quite a lot of time for art as well. So I went to bed. I got like 5 hours sleep again, and then woke up early and started streaming. Welcome everyone to the Sunday edition of the stream. It's day 2 of Ludum Dare. Actually, it's not yet day 2 of Ludum Dare. It will be in an hour and 10 minutes. I am extremely tired. I did not get enough sleep, but I'm awake, and so here I am. This was again unintentional. So at this point, I'm running on like 10 hours sleep for the past 2 days combined, and I've got like a 24-hour stream ahead of me, which is quite the challenge. So what did I do? I started writing a bit of a story, just enough to work in the abilities in some kind of a thread, so that there was enough material for me to then design levels on. And I knew that this would be a give and take thing. You know, doing a little bit of level design might encourage some of the story developments, but I needed to start somewhere, and just jotting down plot beats tended to be a functional solution. So I did that for a bit. Then I started on art. Now, art was really, really interesting because I had a whole lot of art in terms of the things that I wanted to do. I had character animation, which was really important to me. I had the UX and the UI design. I had the environments, which were really important. I wanted to do portraits for dialogue. I needed to do like really important like visual feedback for things, part of the UX. So all the pickups needed to be really clear in terms of their visual flair, and the cards needed to be clear in terms of their function. And I really didn't want to compromise on this part. So the first thing that I did was the character. Character animation is something that I'm very fond of. It's something that I have a lot of experience in, and I know that it's something that I stand out in as far as other developers. Not many developers would attempt to do, 12 frame idle and run animations in a game jam at the fidelity that I was working with. So I knew if I could get it done, that would be a separating factor. So I started animating a character. I also did something different to what I have previously done in the past, which is I actually took the time to iterate on that character design. So the first sprite that I created, I put in the game, and I was like, this is okay, it's not perfect. Let's try again. Let's try a bigger head. And the second time I was like, okay, let's go bigger hair. And I just like worked the character until it felt like it really fit and was nice and refined from like a character design perspective. Like it had the right emotion to it, had the right flow and size and proportions, and I was very proud of this, and I didn't feel like it was wasted time, and I don't feel like that is the case now. I'm really proud of having spent that time. The run cycle is like the fastest animation I think I've ever produced. Like an hour and a half for like a 12 frame run is, for me, like a personal record. So I was feeling very good after that. So then I worked on a lot of the items and objects in the game. So the things that you pick up, the cards, and the platforms that you stand on that have their own sprites. I worked those into the game. And again, I spent like a considerable amount of time here animating those things. It wasn't an unreasonable amount of time. It's probably more than I would have in previous jams. But taking the time to animate these elements meant that the sense of feedback for the game was really good. Like one of the things that I'm really proud of is when you pick up these little like insight tokens, they're like little diamonds. The platform pads that belong to those have this little like effect animation that plays. Like they kind of like respond visually. And that seems like it's a minor thing when you're working in the jam, but it's a very obvious thing when you're playing in the game, that taking that away would be a problem. And this is the case with a lot of UX. Anything that has to do with visual communication that's not explicitly like just depicting an object, anything that relates to the relationship between objects or relationship between the player's actions and the environment, those things are super duper critical. If you don't have experience with this, you'll never think to do them in a game jam. But if you're playing the game, for sure, you will say, oh, if this was the case, then I would have understood this better. Or if you took this away, it would be way harder for me to understand that. So then the card sorting was the next important thing for me to tackle. One of the major mechanics in the game is actually rotating these cards around and putting them in different orders. And again, the visual communication on that is super important. There's like a menu that lists the cards horizontally. You know, selecting a card should have some sort of visual reaction that lets you edit it, and then placing that card again should change it. So there's some like visual hierarchy stuff that needs to happen. And the cards need to be different from each other as well. So I chose to have a kind of iconographic design at first for the cards, and I wanted to come back later and give them again more like tarot card portraits, which are going to look really cool in my head, but I never got around to it. So luckily the first pass was like pretty good, and that tends to be how things go. If something's like good enough, then when push comes to shove later, you don't come back to those things because other things need doing. It then became really clear that as I was putting them into the game, that the pause menu was the only place, like the cards menu was the only place you could see the order of the cards. And it became clear that like I needed to have a mini version of those cards present all the time. So, you know, this is kind of what I call like scope revelation, right? Like, oh, obviously we need to be able to see this outside of this view. So there's no way this game's going to work without it. This needs to be done now. So I spent some time and just did like a small preview, and it was kind of tough to make it not look like Uno cards. Like they're all different colors and they have this white border and they have a symbol in the middle. For a while I was jostling with this, like, how do I make these cards not look like Uno cards? But in the end, it came up pretty nicely. So by this time, we're on like the second day. So with the main character animation and all the feedback out of the way, the next thing that I resolved to do was the environment animation. And this was something that kind of got pushed by the wayside, unfortunately. I really wanted to spend a little bit of time creating these very like delicate, artful, sparing backgrounds. And I knew that it would only take me like an hour or two to do the entire game. But I couldn't do those backgrounds if I didn't know what the level designs look like. So I was like, well, I should probably do some level design now that I have all the pieces of the puzzle. Let's just like build the levels out and then I can do some custom art for them. So I spent like the rest of my art budget doing the content for the game, just building the levels. This took some time, and I knew that I had like spare time at the back end for polish, and I was like, well, I'll just do the environment art, you know, later. And then it was time to do sound before long. So level design was done, time to do sound. Sound is also a really important part of feedback. And I knew that in previous jams, I hadn't really exercised that to the best of my ability. I know I have some chops when it comes to sound design and music. And so I was like, let's commit a few hours to. So I opened up FL Studio and I got to work. I created like a template for the sound effects and a template for the music, and just jumped straight into the VSTs and started plugging stuff down. Okay. I had an idea for doing 8-bit sounds for the sound effects and more realistic sounds for the audio for the music. sus4, gotta love the sus4. It's okay, that's something. That all came together quite quickly, and scrubbing back over the video, it's very clear actually that authoring those sounds took so much less time than putting them into the game. So I'm a bit disappointed with that because, man, like given like 10 more minutes, I probably could have come up with some really nice ambient music to play during the levels or music that plays at the end of a level. There were probably other things that could have been shuffled around or cut to make room for that stuff. So I'm really happy with where the music is at, and I got rated reasonably well for the music in the jam. But if I just taken that extra step during the time that I had, it probably would have been worth it to do that. So I moved on to polish. And the reason why I moved on to polish was there were a couple of other key mechanics that I needed to put in the game to weave the story through the level designs that I created. The first one was actually really important because it's where the theme gets implemented. So the idea of instability in this game comes from the fact that standing on the platforms before you have the abilities jostles you around in midair and like throws you backwards. So I needed to have some way of actually like incorporating this in. And I played around for a little bit with animation curves, and I was like, this is not going to be right. Let's just use a Unity package for Bezier curves. So when all was said and done, I'd spent like 2 hours on this Bezier thing, which is cool. Like, it's definitely awesome to look at, and feels pretty schmick. But, you know, maybe one of those 2 hours could have been spent on music, and maybe an hour could have been spent on that environment art. But given how little sleep I had and just how dazed I was at that point in time, being very late at night, I just wasn't able to make the right choices, unfortunately. So yeah, I put those in. So then I went ahead and tried to cobble together some environment art. Essentially, what this resulted in was edges, edge sprites, basically, which tile along all the edges of the game. I had come up with this sort of like vine grass tile very, very quickly. It took like not that long. And once I had that in properly, it kind of just like softened all of those edges in the game and made it look pretty cohesive, actually. That was very good value. Like the entire game's every single wall and floor and ceiling in the game suddenly looked better with like this one like 128 by 32 sprite. The rest of the art at this stage included the portrait for the main character when they are speaking, the background effect, which I kind of like repeated the same sort of technique that I used in Remember Apollo. It's kind of like this noisy liquid kind of background effect. Because I didn't have time to actually like draw the background sprites, I was like, how do I do something that's going to be consistent and look okay? So that was like a very cheap effect that looks pretty good. Then I worked on shaders for the ability effects, which is this kind of like ghost. I don't know what the word for it is, but it's kind of like a duplication of the sprite that's colored a certain way. It's a very common technique in games like Metroid or games on the Super Nintendo, where you just duplicate the sprite, make it more transparent for every duplication, and tint it a certain color. And so, yeah, I did that and worked on the rest of the dialogue system. This is probably the fastest I've ever built such a robust dialogue system. I managed to somehow cobble together this thing that from scratch could play dialogue with like, you know, ticking the text across. It could play multiple lines of dialogue from different characters while kind of keeping the player from being able to proceed. And I could pin those dialogue sequences onto different elements around the game, or just over a hitbox for like a trigger. So suddenly I had the tools to actually just like put all of the dialogue throughout the platforming of the game. Before that, I had like a bunch of levels. After that, I had like a story. So weaving those through and like just massaging the level designs and getting everything, you know, all full of text and filling out the actual plot was one of the last things that happened in the game. Just a little bit on that before we go on. I think the story for this game was something that could have been a disaster. The game is covering something that's a very delicate subject matter. It's trying to say a lot in a very small amount of time, so it has the hazard of overgeneralizing or caricaturing either the characters or the scenarios. I was tactful enough to stay out of specifics. The story is really about the emotional mechanisms of trauma, you know, how we feel the things that we feel and how we cope with those things, and then how we actually move forward from them. So I tried to keep things quite morally ambiguous, which allows you to, as the player, kind of like impose your own ideas. And I extended that out to not just the events, but to the characters too. So I was proud of the fact that I managed to balance something like that in what is like a 10-minute game, in a story that I wrote in about 45 minutes at 4 a.m. on 10 hours sleep over the last like 50 hours. So I'm very proud of that. So writing the story was kind of a hazard, but it was really the linchpin for like my entire game. Like my game wouldn't have done well at all if it didn't have the story. So couldn't compromise there. Okay. Forward, down, forward, up. We're on the last screen. It's all good, guys. We're finished. That was it. At that point, I'd pretty much done everything that I could do. Time was running out. I quickly put together the last few triggers that I could put into the game that would guide the player into just explaining what the buttons do in a nice contextual way. It was probably the most playable game that I've ever made for Ludum Dare. I actually had my fiance play it for a little bit, and she was able to do the hardest part in the game on her first try.
First go.
And so I was very proud of that. One thing that I think is quite clever is the things that you do in the game feel like they would be very difficult to do in a platformer. Like stacking 5 different velocity pushes in 5 different directions and chaining them into one like crazy jump looks really cool and feels cool to do. It's very easy in the game. So that's something that I'd really struggled with in previous jams, and I think I really hit a sweet spot with difficulty on this one. Then I didn't have any more time for environment art, didn't have time for the tarot card backings. I managed to absolutely like somehow blitz together an end of level transition, a level select screen, and a nice pop-up for when you pick up an item for the first time. And that was it. that was the game. I really was not in my best spot for this jam. I just didn't get the sleep that I wanted, and that's bad luck. But the feedback was so positive, pretty consistently. And when it did do well, I was very relieved because I wanted to make this video. So let's talk about like the things that I learned. When I went into making this game, at the very beginning, following the last jam, I had written down a few things that I wanted to achieve and wanted to focus on. And I do this every jam. And for this jam, that list was completable skeleton, day 1. I had most of the mechanics in on day 1. To lower the scope to just one mechanic, as I had done with Remember Apollo. And I think that I achieved that too. The game feels very cohesive, like it's about one thing. More effort into sound, which I did put more effort into sound. I think more, again, is probably warranted next time. I wanted to try voice acting as well this time, and I didn't get around to that, unfortunately. And the last one was more focus on juice. So all of that nice feedback, all of the polish on the animations, that kind of stuff was what I really wanted to focus on. And I think I nailed it this time. I think like the game feels like it's a complete thing. The 2 obvious pieces of feedback that I was getting was a little bit more sound would have been good. Players definitely felt like the card sorting mechanic, where you have to like pick a card, press space to sort of like raise it up, and then shuffle it, and then press space again to place it. Whether or not the mechanic was right or wrong, the fact that they had to reshuffle at certain times, and if they made a mistake, shuffle maybe twice to like get back to where they needed to do the platforming from and then try again. The cost of doing it wrong meant that players got a little bit frustrated with having to interact with that card sorting multiple times. So in the future, like, I think the solution for that would just be that I would add a feature to let you remember the last card configuration that you used at a certain platform, and then just like do that automatically. But to be honest with you, I think within the confines of the jam, the solution that I came up with was way better than where it started, and was competent enough that like most players got through the game without issue. So I definitely hear that like it could be better, but in a jam, not really. Not given what I wanted to do, or at least making it better than it was is not like a huge priority for me as far as my personal critique on my submission. Man, I really wish I could have gotten more art in there, and I really wish that I'd put a bit more sound in. But this game really is, I think, pretty much the best version of what the concept could have been, given the starting idea that I had and where that led me. There's a little bit of luck in making a game in 48 hours. You don't really have the time to iterate on everything, right? And game development is always about, having an interaction with the game you're making. You play the game, right? You play test it when you're making it to direct you. And having only 48 hours seriously limits the amount of that iteration that you can do. So there is a little bit of luck. Sometimes you don't get it right first try, and you don't have time to go back and make it better. I think this jam really cements my confidence in the video that I made previously about game jams. Definitely, it's the case that if you focus on doing things that you mostly know how to do, you will have a much easier time. So I never really got stuck in this jam. I knew pretty much how to do everything that I was doing. I was really just trying to min-max the efficiency of how fast I got it done. And then the parts where I pushed myself were really in trying to showcase my best features as a developer. And those parts that I focused on were the parts that I obviously got the highest scores in. The value of having a good process is in maximizing your abilities, right? If you have like really, really good art skills, but you don't give yourself time to do any art, then you're not going to produce art that showcases that exceptional skill. Or if you're a great sound designer and you don't give yourself time to do sound design, well, then the sound's not going to be exceptional in that way. It's not going to help you stand out. There was a feature of how I organized my time in this jam that was a little different to how I've done it in the past. And I think it paid off. And next time I'm actually going to double down and do it more, which is putting the stuff that you're good at first, as in not just dedicating a lot of hours to graphics or sound or whatever it is you want to excel at, but putting those things before other things. Like before level design, I had a character animation. That character animation feels like polish, right? It feels like something that you could be testing the character with still frames or just a white box, which I started with. But in fact, prioritizing that animation and making sure that it was like really nice was something that if I hadn't done, that animation would not have been in the game that way. Like there's no way at 3 a.m. on the last day with like 5 hours to go, if I'd left that to like polish, putting polish last would have really, really hurt me in that sense, in the animation, because I care about the animation being good. I don't know, it's different. It's not really how I think about software development. It's not really how they teach it to you at university. But I think it's actually a testament to the way that games can be art, not just software. The elements that are the way they are because they're personal to you and what you're trying to express, those things don't align with standard software design sort of principles, because they don't seem to be foundational things. They seem to be aesthetic, kind of like cream on top things. But yeah, I guess if you want your game to be artful, you need to prioritize the art elements. So that's it. That's been the post-mortem. Thank you so much, everyone who played the game. Thank you for the encouragement that you gave me while I was streaming. It's really touching when people message me, which they do quite often, saying that I am an inspiration or that I encourage them to give game dev or pixel art a shot. And top 10 really kind of like feels as though it's on par with the amount of attention that this channel gets. I really feel like if I'm gonna have such exposure as a developer, I want to be able to back that up, and I feel like I did this time, and I feel like I'm going to do that even better next time. Like I have more to give, so I can't wait to see you guys with a post-mortem for the next jam entry that I make. And if you get a chance, have a play of Trauma and let me know what you think. And if you submitted a game and I didn't get to play it on stream, maybe comment it down below, and myself and other people here in chat can have a play. So, thank you for watching. As always, I've been Adam, you've been the Pixel Pals, and until next time. Hey pal, thanks for watching, and thanks most especially to the patrons and Twitch subs who support this channel and my game dev project Insignia. To find out more, click the links in the description below. And if you like this video, tell YouTube by clicking the like button, and then YouTube will tell me, and then I'll make more videos. That's nice. Thanks again, and until next time.